Mark, Jeff in Las Vegas. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Wonderful to talk to you today about Nichols and May Take Two for Turner Classic Movies for their film festival. I am such a fan. I have to say I'm a fan of Mike Nichols and Elaine May, but never so much as of the comedy team. This is all kind of new to me. I knew of them and seen bits and pieces, but your book and your documentary, I mean, it's just so extensive. It's fascinating to me because I know how popular they were, but how popular were they back in the day?
Hugely. I mean, Mike Nichols was already famous when he became a director, which was on stage in 1963. And he was famous because of this partnership with Elaine May, which really happened fast. I mean, they started working together at the University of Chicago in the mid 1950s, and they came to New York in 1957 and started playing the clubs. And it was a very, very quick jump after that to late night talk shows and primetime variety shows. And then by 1960 and 1961, they were headlining on Broadway in this show called An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May, which was really sort of the Hamilton of its season. It was a sellout show. It was the show that if you were a celebrity in New York or visiting from Los Angeles or London, you just had to see. And they really were national figures. They put out 3 comedy albums. They won Grammys. They were very, very big deal.
And I knew Bob Newhart did phone sketch comedy, but they did also. Was that just a popular kind of go-to routine at the day?
Well, I think you have to consider the fact that their origins as performers were incredibly humble. They started performing in Chicago in not even in nightclubs, but in restaurants where a space could be cleared, or in bars where there was enough free floor space to create a kind of makeshift stage. But what could you do if you were a comedy performing team in a situation like that? It's not as if you could build sets or something. You had like a lot of the time they performed, their only props were 2 stools that were side by side. And what's the easiest kind of thing to do? An imaginary phone call. You don't need a thing. So I think it's something that became a signature for them, but really was probably born out of practicality and necessity.
Now, do you have any insight as a biographer of the team, their writing style? Who came up with the ideas? Who wrote the sketches? Was it a collaboration? Do they accept outside material?
They didn't accept outside material once they started working together. And, they would probably have argued even that anyone wrote the sketches. I mean, they would talk out the ideas together and start developing them back and forth, and they wouldn't really put them on paper, but they would eventually lock it down, in most cases to the word, to the syllable, to like every sentence was pretty much in place, having been refined through performance in front of audiences to the point where they knew exactly what would work and what didn't. But one of them was definitely not more or less the writer than the other. One thing that Mike Nichols always said was that Elaine May was a genius at what he called filling. If you came up with any premise or any idea, he said she had this unbelievable ability to come up with not 1 but 12 things that the character would say in that situation. And Mike, by his own admission, did not have that skill, but the compensatory or complementary skill that he developed was he really started developing a 6th sense for when the audience was with them and when the audience was not with them. He started really understanding how to move a sketch along when it was time to move from one beat to the next. And in a way, those are kind of the skills of a budding director, even though at the time Mike had no idea that he was going to end up pursuing a directing career.
Now, when I think of that time period, I think of Lenny Bruce as the bad boy of comedy, but they tackled some risky topics as well, like adultery.
They did. I mean, this was a very sophisticated, urbane. They weren't particularly political, although they did dabble in that once in a while. But one of the really unusual things about Elaine May was that she wasn't like, for a woman comedian of the time, she wasn't a pratfaller. She wasn't a clown. She didn't make fun of the way she looked. She wasn't desexualized. She was this sort of glamorous, sultry brunette, and people were not used to a woman like that being funny at all. And so I mean, she once joked that in their initial when they belonged to this troupe called the Compass Players, she always ended up playing like the seductive spy or double agent parts because she was the only one who could wear a trench coat. But it was yeah, it was they were adult. They had this particularly grown up, sophisticated sensibility, and the vibe was, you know, if you got them, you got them, and their comedy was for the people who got them.
Yeah, because they created almost like mini situations and sketches, while most comedians would do jokes or stories. They actually took into these characters and created this world, like you're spying on them for the moment.
Right. Most of their sketches were probably between 3 and 12 minutes. And it was always just one-on-one, the two of them. And you can do a lot in 8 or 10 minutes. I mean, you can go fairly deep into the psychological dynamic between two people. And that's what they really like to do. I mean, Mike's form of comedy, the thing that he felt he was good at was he liked playing impatient characters. He like besieged or put upon characters, or a character who desperately wants something and can't get it from the character played by Elaine. And that kind of setup often allowed her to just do these virtuoso comedy bits, and that's what grounds some of their strongest material.
And tell me about some of the kinescopes that were discovered from live TV broadcasts. I mean, talk about a rare discovery.
Well, you know, it's amazing, and it's truly a researcher's gift, because one of the you know, one of the hard things is how little comedy from that period is documented. I mean, there's virtually no meaningful footage of the Broadway show, for instance. And one of their most famous sketches, which was one called Pirandello, which was considered their most psychologically complicated and sort of formally daring sketch, was never filmed and never recorded. But you know, we're lucky to have the kinescopes, just as we're lucky to have their comedy albums, and we're lucky that a lot of their appearances on shows like Steve Allen's show or the Dinah Shore show are preserved. So
Ed Sullivan? Were they on Ed Sullivan? Or
I don't think they were on Ed Sullivan. I might
really
be misremembering, but I know they did Steve Allen, they did Jack Parr, they did Dinah Shore and Perry Como, and they did a number of primetime specials for shows like Omnibus. But also you have to remember their performing years were pretty compressed. I mean, they didn't start appearing on TV until the very, very end of 1957, and by 1960 they were headed to Broadway, and by 1962 they were broken up as a performing team. So it's a pretty tight window of performing celebrity.
And you've said that they're very committed to the written word. They don't improv. They perfected their sketches. Did anyone write these down? Are they available in a book? All of their sketches? You said the one that was never performed, I mean, recorded. I mean, can you see what they wrote and, you know, kind of get the idea?
Well, you know, I mean, first of all, I will say they did famously do improv when they were on Broadway. They ended every show by asking the audience to suggest a first line, a last line, and a literary style. And they would literally do a new sketch every night based on that. So they were incredibly great at thinking on their feet. But their classic repertoire of about 8 or 10 sketches, I don't think that most of them are printed in books, but you can see most of them if you search around YouTube. Like the mother and son sketch, a famous sketch they did called Teenagers, the phone operator sketch, like either video or audio of almost all of their greatest work is available.
Yeah, because someone like me who had drama in high school and in college, that would have been a great resource to have the sketches of Nichols and May, you know, have them just sit there and do it for competitions or do it for class or something. I think that would be really, really a great item.
Oh yeah, well, and certainly in this documentary, you get to understand a lot of what made them really great.
Now, do you go beyond for maybe their feature film work after their sketch comedy days? Because, everyone knows The Graduate but I just love Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I think it's a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite films. And it's just his style, just progressively after that film is just amazing.
Oh yeah, well, the book I wrote is about his entire career. It goes way beyond Nichols and May and takes you through 50 years of his work as a director. And I know that there's a writer who's currently working on a biography of Elaine May, which I'm sure will follow her well past her collaboration with Mike Nichols. So that'll be a great thing to have.
Whole chapter on Ishtar, I hope, because I remember seeing that first run. I saw it 3 or 4 times. I think it's a comic masterpiece, especially the music by Paul Williams.
She's a completely fascinating director, and I'm sure that we'll get a deep dive into all 4 of the movies that she was behind the camera for.
Excellent. And finally, did you have a chance to meet them or discuss anything with them while they were alive?
Yeah, I knew Mike for the last 12 or 13 years of his life. I was not planning to do a biography until after he passed away. It hadn't occurred to me, but I certainly knew him, and I interviewed him extensively for my first book, and got to know him personally during those years. And yeah, I interviewed Elaine May for my new book, which is about Mike Nichols, and her perspective on their partnership was just incredibly valuable and thoughtful and fascinating, and I'm so grateful to have had the chance to get to talk to her.
Yeah, I've heard they were both very accommodating, great people. They would love to talk about their projects, and they were just very gracious people.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mark. What a great insight to 2 comedy legends. And I wish you all the success, and also with the Turner Classic Movie Film Festival this year. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you very much.